morning. We're going to look in this panel on the impact of technology on entrepreneurship and specifically then sort of also try and focus a little bit on technology and women. We're going to start off with asking each one a question and introducing the panel to you. Then we'll be talking in the panel for about 20 minutes. And then I would like to actually throw it open to the floor because I see quite a few African women entrepreneurs, hopefully technology people here, and I would also like to sort of involve their experiences. So we would try and make it very interactive after about 20 minutes. Okay, so we've heard from Microsoft before that entrepreneurship without technology is bound to fail in Africa, so hopefully we'll show you that there is some of that. I'll start with Matilda Nuklovo. She's from Zimbabwe. She studied electrical engineering in Bochum, was one of, 3% women, female students, and then studied at the business school in Berlin. She was born in Bulawayo, so we're sort of neighbors. My name is Anneli Serfontein. I come from South Africa. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself. Matilda, what does the entrepreneurial landscape look like in Africa now as we speak?
Due to, broadly speaking, across the continent, a high formal sector unemployment rate, you have young people looking to entrepreneurship and leveraging tech to start up enterprises. And what you see now is that these enterprises are going across borders. So you find entrepreneurs in Nigeria now expanding to Kenya, now going to South Africa. So I think that's a very interesting development. The positive externality of these enterprises, these startups, is that they are solving problems that are unique to the African terrain. So I'll give you two examples. There's a startup called Clock in Johannesburg. It's an edutech startup. It started off as trying to solve the problem of the last mile not having access to quality education. What they do now is that they have tech solutions for tertiary institutions, starting, for example, with the African Leadership Network. That is a startup founded by a Nigerian entrepreneur, solving problems in South Africa with potential to scale to many other parts of Africa. Or you have Katura.com, which I think would be interesting for Grace. It is a marketplace for artisans to sell their wares. So you have now people leveraging the internet, technology, coming together with coders, coming together with people with business skills to say, how do we build businesses and then scale them to the rest of Africa? I think another interesting development, I lived in Nigeria at the beginning of this year, and also I work in VC, so this is also a very interesting thing for me, is that there are angel business networks that are being built. Mr. Olaolu, is that right? Mentioned that he's part of the Lagos Angel Network. While I was there, they were setting up the Abuja Angel Network. So high net worth individuals in Africa are turning around and saying, hey, what is this about this tech industry? What are the returns looking like? What are the risk factors looking like? How can we help? So it's not only looking to international funders, but saying, how can we leverage people that are on the continent that understand the problems that we're trying to solve and understand the challenges that we have in executing our business models? Yeah, those are the two interesting things that I find.
Okay, that is already a nice introduction. We're doing ladies first. I'm sorry, guys. I'm moving to Jessica Berlin, who's the founder and managing director of Co-Struct, and you work in various emerging economies, Afghanistan, China, Myanmar, Rwanda. Is also a foreign policy and economic development expert. You've studied in Africa, I think, no, didn't you? Okay. Worked, okay. I thought you studied in Cape Town, but I got it wrong. How can technological entrepreneurs be change agents in Africa? We've heard a little bit from Matilda.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. Yes, I would say almost the other way around. How can technology entrepreneurs in Africa not be change agents? This is it's almost impossible to keep track even of the innovations and ideas coming out of the continent. I think on a macro level, the implications of technology in the entrepreneurship landscape in Africa is most exciting on 3 fronts. The first one, obvious one, is leapfrogging capacity, which don't need to explain to this room. The fact that African entrepreneurs and SMEs are leapfrogging over all 20th century service delivery models in both B2B and B2C. And this is not going to slow or stop at any time. The second piece that I find really promising and important, in particular with my background as a political economist, I used to work in foreign policy, security policy, and economic development. And so a lot with governments, a lot with international aid. And there is a growing recognition that aid and the business as usual in the development sector is changing and evolving. There's more focus on sustainability and demand-driven solutions. But by the very nature of the aid industry being led by economists and political scientists and such, there's not a real sense of what does it take to run a business? What does it take to go from an idea to a startup to a sustainable business? And so the aid industry is learning this process along with startups to a certain extent. And I think there's a huge opportunity for tech entrepreneurship in Africa to help change the dynamic of what does foreign aid look like in markets in developing countries, to help create infrastructures that make life and business easier for startups, and also to work with governments to make the kinds of regulatory and financial environments in which startups can thrive, and which also foreign investors can feel comfortable investing in a high-risk market. So, yeah, they're not only transforming their own markets and commercial sectors, they can also help transform aid into something more sustainable and demand-driven that really leaves a big imprint in locally led, locally driven economic development. The third front that I think in the medium to long term can have massive implications also for Europe is how African solutions, African designed innovations are going to not just be relevant for Africa and for other developing markets. I mean, look here in Germany. I'm half German, half American. And when you go to rural areas of Germany or rural areas of the United States or in any other country of the West, there are huge service delivery problems. There's a huge digital divide. And the fact that African entrepreneurs are looking at the unbanked, the off-grid, the offline people who are more isolated from urban centers and innovation economies, that's something that also we can learn from here in the Western world. And I think as the prior, I think it was the gentleman here, the prior talk mentioned, right now African entrepreneurs, they're focusing on solving their own problems. Logical, but when some of the big success stories start to come, those are going to be scalable, not just in Africa, but internationally, adapting solutions in medtech, in mobile health, mobile education, that can transform communities really around the world. So I'm excited to see how these next 10, 20, 30 years look.
Okay, thanks, Jessica. Now we're finally getting to the men. We're moving on to Randolph Obuza, who's got a CV longer than I think most of us in the room. He has been called the Mark Zuckerberg of Accra by Forbes Africa magazine in 2012. He was one of the most promising entrepreneurs under 30. He's the founder and president of BISA. And we've heard before that there's a need for programmers, and finding these skills is often difficult. You have, 9 programming languages that you do. So first of all, would like to know, how did you sort of do it? How did you get where you are? And then I would like to know a little bit more, if you can tell us briefly about BISA, which is a mobile application that allows users to ask doctors questions and guidelines and basically managing health, which I think is maybe something which Jessica's referred to, where it's not only applying to Africa, but could apply to any rural area. So now my microphone is working, yeah?
Okay, so thank you so much. So how did I get into programming and entrepreneurship? It started in my university. So I got to a university after 2 years. I felt 4 years was a very long time, and I wanted to do so much right after school, but university was a bit limiting. So I took onto the internet. I read stories of Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, and it really inspired me. And I thought if they could do it in their countries, I could do it in Ghana. So I started a company in my second year in the university. I took onto the internet to learn programming. So right after that, you know, with programming, once you know the fundamentals, you can just learn many more programming languages. And that was how it started. I built a web browser, you know. It's usually touted as Africa's first web browser. I got lots of recognition, but I realized it wasn't enough. I wasn't solving key problems around my, where I live in Ghana. So I came together with a team. We started a company, and from 2012 through to this year, we've been building all kinds of software innovation that we believe can solve problems. So a typical one is during the Ebola crisis, we came up with a tool called Ebola Ghana Alert. What it did was to inform the public on, you know, what to do not to get Ebola, if you're seeing symptoms, who to contact. And there was an interesting learning we found there. We realized people were not just using the tool to find out about Ebola. They wanted to know more about different health problems. Young people even thought it was a tool to speak up on sexual and reproductive health issues. So right after the Ebola crisis, we pivoted the technology and we started BISA. So what BISA does is, as you already know, lots of people use mobile devices in Africa. In Ghana, for instance, one person can be using as much as 2 or 3 mobile devices. So we decided to launch BISA on all kinds of devices. So whether you're using a smartphone or not, you have access to BISA and you'll be able to speak to a doctor. And for young people who, because of how our society is very conservative and they can't speak up on sexual and reproductive health issues, they're able to use the technology to speak to a doctor. So we have about 40 doctors on standby. When you're sending the question, you'll be able to get your response within 5 minutes to 24 hours. But because I'm a technology-driven person, we ain't just looking at just the questions. This is lots of data we are gathering. So we have like a dashboard where the information that are coming in, we're able to pick up what kinds of questions people are asking. And if there's a particular trend in a disease or an outbreak, we'll be the first to know. So we won't be sitting in Ghana for the Center for Disease Control in the US to say meningitis is on the rise or Ebola is on the rise. We are using a tool that is made in Ghana to predict such trends. And today with technology, we've expanded to 4 countries. So we partnered Facebook. They have free basics. So if you don't, you go to internet.org, you can have access to free internet. So we have BISA that is working in South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, and Liberia. So.
But do you work on a subscription basis, or do they register, or how does it work?
So BISA is free to use. Users who want to actually meet a doctor pay a premium for you to meet a doctor. So you can call a doctor. So we set up a call center, just quite new. So we set up a call center because we realized majority of our users are people who cannot type in English. Voice is they want to explain their disease in a way that the doctor would understand. So we set up a voice over IP where you can just call in from the app and speak to a doctor. So.
And how many users do you have?
So we've grown our user base to about 30,000 as at now. So
just in Ghana or everywhere?
Across. So we have about 4,000 users who are coming from South Africa. That's interesting because we don't have a physical setup there. We don't do targeted marketing there. So they use BISA through free basics. So it means they go through a lot of processes to use BISA, but they have 4,000 of them using BISA through free basics. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'm moving on to Oliver Skorpik. He's CEO of Turbo Moya, and it is a company that is based in Tanzania, am I right? And has an enormous digital potential to become, you hope, the #1 online and SMS marketplace in Africa. But at the moment, you're only based in East Africa. You call it maybe become the Amazon of East Africa.
Think big, huh?
Can be, yes. So tell us a little bit about it. How does it sort of operate? Where are your IT people?
Yeah, so since I'm not joining this year's conference to pitch our startup, let me just get into the issues and the topics we're discussing, and let me start by maybe drawing up a triangle for all of us to imagine, where you would have reach, revenue, and the level of technology on the far ends, okay? And all the consultants in the room now already try to find the perfect balance here for their market, but let me use that triangle also to explain a little bit on what we're doing and where we came from. So in 2012, we started out as a classifieds platform that was mainly SMS based. This was something that built us quickly a lot of reach. We were the #1 classifieds platform in Tanzania. It had some but little level of technology, and it was really hard to make any revenue from that, okay? Then, as we pivoted along the way, we ended up providing more B2B kinds of services to the merchants we connected to. So we started giving them proper online presence in our shop-in-shop platform. We started providing solutions to problems they couldn't solve themselves in the space of delivery, mostly inside the city of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. Start to do that in the more rural areas as well. But those are really simple services that give you revenue. You don't have a large number of clients, not so much reach, it's a B2B business, and it requires only a little level of technology. Now, when we hear that the future of entrepreneurship in Africa needs to be logged in by technology, this is also probably where we should be heading to find real, sustainable and deep technological solutions that help you kind of make the competition. Because if you have a business that doesn't rely on a deep technological solution, it's probably easy to overwin your reach by just marketing budget, or make as much revenue or maybe a little bit more. Combination with that, just doing something a little more efficient or a little bit cheaper and so on. So I think this is, I just wanted to put this triangle out into the room. I actually just thought of it when I was listening to the entering keynotes, and how hard this really is for each market like ours in Tanzania, and how different that is for other different countries, and how this relates to your strategy as a startup. And the question of the panel, amongst others, was how technology impacts the development and the growth of entrepreneurship. And I think that's really a big question, because we experience that our development as a startup is right now not much dependent on the level of technology, but more on building the reach and securing some revenues. And then the technology is to come. And you asked about our IT department, because I told you up front that they are all in Germany. We're on the other side, we're starting a coding school in Tanzania, and that gap is just so big. Even if you have skilled developers in Africa, the level of code or is just so different when you look at the software that's being built in the Valley or even in Central Europe. So every startup has to kind of find its strategy moving within this triangle, depending on the phase where they are, and this depends a lot on your market and business model, and this is not an answer, this is just a lot of questions, and I think that's what we can do here.
Yeah, I'm not finished with you yet, because you also told me that this coding school that you're thinking of putting up may be a girls-only coding school. Yeah. Now, if we look at technical studies in Africa and in Europe, if you look, for example, with mining engineering, one example, at my old alma mater in Johannesburg, 45% women in a male-dominated form of study, while here at the Technical University in Berlin for computer engineering, it's 7% women. You had 3% women. Are there more IT women? Is there more gender equality in your experience?
So I'm not an anthropologist, I'm not a social scientist.
And not an educationist, but just in your general, because I asked you, what is a gender parity, and you said 50% working for you.
So if you're asking for the reasons why we seriously consider making this a girls-only school, I think there are some very bold approaches from my humble perspective. One is that in the political and also cultural sphere that we are in, women are just falling so much behind. We need to do something to empower them. And without, I mean, we don't see ourselves tapping into any real cultural discussion or cultural, social, national development processes. We're a tech company, we need coding resources, and we might as well develop women to be those. Secondly, from my very personal experience, I have a PhD wife. I think women are very great in analytical thinking, and I think that is very important for coding, so why not? And that is as illegitimate as as saying women are that, guys are that. I think it's also just a signaling that you can do if you start something new in that space, and if you want to inspire other organizations to empower women, you just have to do it yourself.
Okay, then please pass the microphone on to, we have a woman here, like Natalie Pestunovic. I hope I pronounce your name right. You're the co-founder of Conta, but you're also a back-end and integration engineer working in Africa. You've got meetup groups here, women tech makers. Do you agree with his analysis?
With which part?
Women are more analytical.
No, I wouldn't say. Some women are more analytical, some men are less, some men are more. Your wife is definitely sounds very analytical. That's great.
Okay, but you're working here in Berlin, you've worked in Africa. Is there a difference working here, working there? What are the sort of the problems you encounter?
There's definitely a difference. I worked in several places. So I'm originally from Israel. I spent the last 4 years in Germany and now in Kenya. So I have 3 cultures to compare. Maybe you can count the American one with whom I've been working as well. Every culture is very different. Is there some specific focus you'd like me to have?
We're talking about technology,
yes.
Sort of working as a woman in technology in those cultures, and specifically looking at Kenya, if there's sort of difference.
Specifically in Kenya, I love the situation more than in Western countries, for the reason that I feel that the expectations from both sides is more equal. So looking at my friends in Kenya, in the places I worked and volunteered with, I saw a good mix all the time. I didn't see too many events that are focused on women to promote, to encourage, just because there's always a nice mix. And that gives such a nice feeling to have this. In Kenya, I work in a coding school. I volunteer with them. They were completely on donation based. They pay the scholarship of their own students, and they give them a training of 3 months that in the end will help them have a better job. And without even trying to have quotas, they always have a nice mix. I saw this over several periods, over several sessions they had. It's just there.
Oh, it's very interesting.
For me, it was very positive to see.
Now, I want to sort of put it to the rest of the panel. I mean, you also work in sort of specifically in, or before in programming. Is that also your experience in Ghana? That there's sort of gender parity?
So I think the gender bit, there are lots of programs that huge organizations are running to get more women involved in technology. My company, for instance, last year we had an internship program where we had 2 female and just 1 guy. And the best programmer in all of them was the female that we are hoping to retain after university. So, you know, I think women are more analytical and yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. You do agree, despite your 9 programming languages. So this sort of, that maybe talents and skills are not there, it's not, it doesn't only apply to women then, it's like...
For talent, I think people have, when you think of, for instance, when you think of building solutions, for me, for instance, you just have just a laptop. When I started, I had like a laptop and a dream, right? And all I needed was the skills and the mentorship. And I'd like to highlight on somebody that's here, Eric Osiakwan. You know, he met me about 4 years ago when I started. So I don't know if you can stand up for everybody to see you. Yeah, he played a very key role in me sitting here today because I reached out to people like him who had a lot of experience in, you know, these things, and they pretty much accelerated my thoughts. So I think the talent is there, but mentorship and skills training is critical in getting the person the right skills they need. Yeah.
Okay, you want to?
Yeah, if I can just add something to that. I think for me personally, it's not so much of a question of women. It's a question of young people. 60% of the continent are under 30. So that's 15 million young women, and I mean, that's 30% young women and 30% young men. And I mean, entrenched cultures and infrastructures of sexism, well, that's not an African problem, that's just a human problem. And, you know, if every company and every employer, every school does what they can to support the particular challenges that women and girls face in school, you know, that's very important, and that's great. But when I think about the tech entrepreneurship sector as a whole, customer doesn't care who wrote the code behind the product that they're using. You know, they care that it works. They care that it's good and meets their needs. And so it's logical that if half of your customers are men and half of your customers are women, more or less, unless you have a very niche, you know, gendered niche product, well, then you'll want to have male and female inputs on the creation of that product so that you're hitting and attractive to the most possible customers. And yeah, so at the end of the day, it's, you know, how can we exponentially capture the talent of potential entrepreneurs and potential techies? You know, and because not also, let's be honest, yeah, not everyone can be an entrepreneur and do what you've done. And that's okay. But as your company grows, you need the talent to be there that you can hire, or like you're facing in Tanzania as well. So I think a big challenge beyond the question of women is simply how can we exponentially educate young people to the highest level to be resources to tech entrepreneurs or to become tech entrepreneurs themselves. And how can we help them in particular with young women indeed to help them get over that gap in puberty where a lot of young people drop out of school, or in particular young girls drop out and also drop away from the sciences, to catch them young and then be able to funnel them straight into jobs in the growing tech sector.
You agree, Martin?
Yes and no. yes, I think the problem that you, as you rightly said, is that we need more young people out there. We need to build systems in place or structures that support their entrepreneurial journeys to make sure that the best and the brightest ideas do come forward. However, having supported female friends as they were trying to get together funding rounds for their startups, there is, and I think we cannot ignore, an access problem for young women. When it comes to mentorship, there's certain cultural nuances that you can't walk by. And looking at the fact that women on the African continent, on a small scale, are, they make up a large portion of entrepreneurs, they make up a large portion of people that support families. So if I understand what you're saying, it's a youth problem, but I think the targeted programs at supporting female entrepreneurs are critical to make sure that African women do not fall behind, to make sure that they are part of the success story of a healthy African tech and entrepreneurship ecosystem.
I want to, at this point, sort of open it up a little bit to the floor, because we have here, I don't know where Mary is, yeah, at the back. I mean, I would like to know what your experience was sort of setting up your company, and whether you encountered some of the problems that Matilda said in terms of accessing funds, in terms of technology. Where's the microphone?
Our experience was that, and I'm not sure it's because we were a female company, but a lot of the resistance we got is because we were in the startup, and some of the solutions we were trying to implement out there, the partnerships actually were our biggest challenges, going to banks and saying, we want to partner with you, we want to give you this solution that will do this, and they say, okay, that place is being played by bigger companies. You have people like Verifone and Ingenico, which are multinationals, and they're the ones producing these types of devices, and we're going in and they're saying, and who are you? So our challenge is more that there is not a well-built ecosystem to support startups, to find the types of partnerships that they need. It might be easier to push your product to other small businesses, but as a small company trying to push your products to a big company without the name recognition is very, very difficult. Whether you are female-owned or you are, you could be even male and all that. I don't think the gender is the problem. I think the biggest problem is the fact that the ecosystem's not built. The culture is not there to support these types of businesses. And for the small businesses, you will need to do a lot of education before you can even push your product. How is your product being used? How is the technology? It can be too complicated. It will be very intimidating to the target market that you're trying to sell to. And so you need a lot of resources that small companies don't have, but the big companies have, to spend that money educating the public.
So the problem is more SMEs not getting access to funding, that there's no special funds like here in Europe where the EU actually sort of tries to sort of support SMEs.
It's the funding, but even more than the funding, it's the support ecosystem where big organizations can take up the mentorship, and also the expertise, the technical expertise on how to approach some of the markets that you're trying to get into. How do you do that? How do you write a good proposal that can get some kind of funding? And yeah, funding is a big problem, but even before the funding, there are other problems that need to be first dealt with before you can even utilize that funding.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
I would like to add something to your comment about the ecosystem, and that the ecosystem to support entrepreneurs is just not there yet and so on. And I agree with that. And I think parts of that is that the way of the ecosystem that is needed on the African continent for startups, especially tech startups like the ones debated, is just fairly different from the ecosystems we know here in Europe or in the States or elsewhere. Why do I think so? There's so much on the rise, and there's so little transparency on who's doing what right now. So as a startup, what I experience a lot is I have to really very, very actively go talk to a lot of people, do networking here and there, send proposals, send pitch decks, to even find out who's working on what and see where is a fit and how we can move on as a startup. Now, the ecosystems that we have typically for tech startups is very venture capital driven. Now, we have some VC in the room, and I'm happy that we have some venture capital experience on the floor, and I've worked for a big German VC myself. But once a venture capitalist enters your company, you have some sort of agenda that has to match that fund and also, but what you actually need is time, time and breadth. That includes money, but with that money having so much agenda attached to it, it limits your smartness and your openness to really develop in a structured way and not cut off certain options. So my call out would be to those within this ecosystem or within Europe who are able to fund startups or initiatives with a little bit less of an agenda than a venture capitalist. Please do so. And then other agendas come to place, because your program probably asks to focus a lot on impact investing. And then I would try to add to keep in mind that anything you do and you build in Africa has impact. So whether that is a for-profit only marketplace kind of startup as we are, it's still creating jobs. It's even creating schools in order to be able to provide jobs, and so on and so on. It's contributing to infrastructure. So I think the ecosystem we need for startups to grow in Africa is just a very new kind of ecosystem, and we all have to invent this future ourselves, right? And that goes out to the organizations out there.
Okay, thank you. I'm taking questions now. Any more experiences like Mary's? Like I'm seeing here a lot of people there. Yeah, just wait for the microphone.
Hi, my name is Cindy Carbeck. I'm working for a consulting company that's working for a female economic empowerment project in Mozambique. And there I have to say we have a different picture than maybe in Kenya. We have a huge disparity in technology within women and boys, or girls and boys, and women and men. And my question is a bit like, why do you think Kenya is different? I mean, I think you are quite 1, 2, 3 steps ahead maybe than Mozambique, but it would be interesting because when we have a coding course, there is 90% men and no women. If we have a pitch, there is like 95% men and no women. So we want to encourage more women to come, but we don't really, or we try to figure out still how we reach them. Why is it? Is it social norms? Is it capacity? Is it their self-esteem? Like, it's kind of a mixture, I guess. And then to the ecosystem and SMEs, venture capital is mainly given to men. If they're women applying, this is our experience, they are not getting venture capital just because they're a woman. If pitching is a woman, they are less accepted and less recognized than when a man is pitching. So I think there is a gender problem we have.
Okay, I think first, Natalie. Yeah.
I would agree with you that in the startup ecosystem and the funding part and the business part of it, it is very different from the tech side from what I saw. So I did definitely see way less startups led by women, and I'm trying to attend many meetups and events and conferences in Nairobi and in the area. It is a problem, I agree, no doubt. To the question why my experience on the technical side is different, I want to ask you a question. The program that you said that you saw 90% male attendance, what's the price to attend this program?
No, there's no price to it. It's like, for example, we try to work with the youth tech environment. So, for example, there is a network of developers. They're amazing young male, young boys mainly, who are doing meetups. They're doing their own coding sessions, boot camps, whatever. They are mainly boys. There are a couple of girls, but they're shining stars, definitely, and they're catched by every organization who comes in, right? Because there are like just 3 of them. But if they do a coding session without having a special focus on how to call women, they don't apply. They are not in the talking session so much. We don't really know. We try to encourage them, and we try to work within the communities, like also with the parents and the schools, to kind of go further back and not just start when they're already out of school. So I think it's a self-esteem. I don't believe I can do it or can be part of it. What is not only in Africa. I mean, we have in Europe the same, right? There have so little women in engineering, ICT compared to men, because we are raised with dolls and they are raised with more.
I would love to talk to you after this to help to share from my experience on how I'm doing this in Berlin, because the program that I run in Berlin that's called Women Tech Makers is encouraging women and people of diverse background to step into this and be brave. So it may be helpful, and I would love to help. To answer the question why, speculation of mine, why I think I see it's different, is because specifically that school that I work with, their aim is to give you tech skills with the purpose for you to help your family better. And from what I see just in Kenya, my experience is not all Africa, wouldn't say even all East Africa. It is expected from women to help in the house as much as men, to help not in the house as in doing chores maybe, but as in supporting. And this is a financial opportunity. So they just jump on it. And that's what I see.
Okay. I'm taking the next question. Let's move on. Yes, yeah.
Hello, my name is Christine Holzbauer. I have a German sound name from Austria, but I'm French. And I would like to bring the voice of French Africa here, because I think it's among the new ecosystem that Africa needs. I've been living quite extensively on the continent, mainly in West Africa, where I'm a journalist, I'm a reporter, and I cover West and Central Africa. French-speaking, because I write for the French-speaking magazines of my group, which is a Pan-African group called IC Publication, that publishes African Business, African Banker, New African, and New African Woman, both in French and in English, but for the different countries of the continent. And I think it is very important that here there are nobody representing Senegal, for example, who is one country which is a hub in Africa, along Kenya, but on the other side, along Tanzania is among them also. And I think it's very important that in this raising generation, I lived in Senegal since 2003 and Mali before. I think it's very important that it is among the new generation, this gap will be filled, and that English-speaking Africa will speak to French-speaking Africa. And as a matter of fact, I'm not here today as a journalist, but I'm here because it's going to be a big event organized in Abidjan, in Ivory Coast, by December.
Sorry, I need a question.
Yeah. Yes, but it was more an intervention.
Yeah? Okay.
You know. The question
but our time is limited.
Yeah,
yes,
the question is about, this new ecosystem, and I think it's very important, and to some extent I would have liked, some of return on the intervenants about, which kind of experience they had in trading with French-speaking Africa or devising solution. You were talking about Ebola. It's not only Ghana who was concerned about Ebola. You had Guinea, you had Liberia, Sierra Leone. So what was done to try to bridge the gaps and link people together, which include, in West Africa, English-speaking and French-speaking, and farther down, Mozambique, Portuguese-speaking countries also.
Sorry, so your question is how can Francophone and Anglophone Africa work closer together?
Yes, among the general, creating a new ecosystem could be that. And if you just...
Je pense on doit pratiquer le français.
Déjà, commencer, oui.
But we don't have translators here.
Bien sûr, but you know, here it's mainly English speaking, so let's stick with it. But if you just allow me to finish, so I'm here today not as a journalist, but as representing the lab. And it's going to be a big event in Abidjan, French-speaking Africa, Ivory Coast, big countries, 400 startups to come and present itself. Well, 50 will be from Ivory Coast, but there is 50 other from all over the continent, including Mozambique. And I just, you know, for the people who hear startup or who are here in the room today, please come to see me and I can give you all the information.
Okay, but I don't want information. I want questions. So it was very interesting, but please, can we stick to questions? There at the back, I have got a question here. The hand that went up at the back, yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Thomas Kalunge. And I have a question because what I can see the differences is that she reports Mozambique. She has different experiences in terms of gender gap and gender entrepreneurship. And what I'm asking is that are the experiences in Ghana and the experiences in Tanzania, can they be translated or can they be transmitted to other countries in terms of women becoming more entrepreneurial and becoming more technical oriented in terms of entrepreneurship? So is there a way that you can reflect experiences from one African country to the other particular country?
I think that's a very good question, how we can sort of share experiences. And I think I also always like, as a South African, to remind people that Africa is a continent and not a country. Because I think in Europe, people always tend to think we're all the same, yeah. So let's start with Ghana. And then
yeah, so as I stated earlier on, so with Ghana, we have amazing women who are leading the revolution there. So there's someone you can look up called Ethel Kofi and Regina Jari. So what they are doing is they've built networks of women entrepreneurs where they are training them in technology and they are finding links to other female entrepreneurs around the continent. So these are like the key people who are very much supported by corporate Ghana. So for me, that's what I think you should look these ladies up and see if you can partner them in your countries. Because Ethel, for instance, she has a network of about 20 countries with female tech entrepreneurs and everything else. Yeah.
But do you, I mean, you also work in South Africa, you also work in other countries of Africa. Do you sort of see differences in the level of the technical skills that people bring with them because of the different education systems?
From my work extensively, I think the technical skills in Ghana in terms of the female technologists, I think are very good. As I stated earlier on, I think this, I mentioned, yeah, so I don't know how to go about it. Let me see. So I'll take what I'm saying back again. So in Ghana, my experience in software engineering, right, you have women who, not so many women who are in the space. So the very few women who are taking charge in this are pretty much creating the opportunity for other women to study it. So you have Regina Jari, who has started her own academy for just women. So it's not open for everybody, it's just women where she's training the skills. So I think that's where I'm seeing that, but yeah, so.
Okay.
Well, my answer will be very short because we don't have any experience yet. But I just hope that for two facts. One, opening up the school only for schools, for girls, will still fill the room. Our program is designed for 30 students at a time, and we'll see how long the course will be. It's planned to be 6 months, but there's also discussions about shorter entry, 1 month program. So I think if that's the limit, it will fill up. And the other thing is referring to your comment earlier. If you there was this beautiful video circling around the web a while ago. Unfortunately, it was an advertisement, but they asked girls to throw a ball like a girl. And when they were, I think, below 12 or 13, they just threw the ball. And then at some age, post-puberty, they kind of made fun of themselves. And I think if you catch girls at a certain age, you don't have that issue. But that's obviously a cultural thesis. And then I think in Tanzania, we have a well mixed society in terms of the religions and everything, so everything is a little less stigmatized anyways. That's different probably in other countries.
Yeah.
I would like to add to that there are obviously differences between different countries, just like Berlin and Munich will have different types of people. And a good way to make this all better is to have an international network. And so the purpose of this group that I'm organizing the Berlin chapter of is to take people from different countries, different backgrounds, and help them connect. So those who travel go to different places and give a talk and meet the people there. Those who don't travel get information maybe about scholarships, and then they get to travel and learn more. And then you exchange this knowledge and exchange these cultures. And this gap is becoming slightly less big. And this is very important.
But doesn't the problem go much deeper? Doesn't it start in primary school where there are less, and I'm looking at you, Martina, where there may be less girls than boys, or girls drop out, or they have to go and help on the fields or something? Shouldn't we look at it like 5 steps back, why women are maybe not in these sort of technical jobs?
Most definitely. Well, research shows that the problem comes between primary school and high school, which is when young people transition from being kids to puberty. Young girls stay behind for simple reasons like lack of sanitary towels, and they fall behind, I don't know, if you're falling behind 5 days a month, you're falling behind 5 times 12 is 60 days a year. That's a lot that you're taking away from your education. By the time you do your O-levels or your A-levels, girls have just fallen back so far that there's less girls going to university to maybe do technical subjects, and that also translates then to the professional world. You need to take 5 steps back and solve the root cause and not try to solve the symptom.
Okay, I'm looking for more questions. Yes, there. Here. Yeah. We're looking for the microphone.
Yes, hello. My name is Robert. I'm Spanish by nationality, living in Germany, but I'm an entrepreneur and investor in West Africa since many, many years. Principal in Sierra Leone, Liberia, Guinea, Ghana. So I'm not in the east part of Africa. Everybody is talking here about Kenya, Tanzania. I'm agreeing with all of you, in principle, theoretically. For women, it's quite difficult to do business. We're investing in companies with women's principle. I don't know why. But in Africa, women are more, they have to fight for themselves. My question to you is, and the gentleman said, the eco business is very difficult. You know, you have to pay 2 years in advance rent to have a place. In Silicon Valley, in US, the people just sitting in the garage and they develop. What we can do, my question to all of you is, what we can do, investors like me and startups like you, to change the local policies, to go to the government, to go to many places. It's not like in Europe, you go to a place and everything is done, or almost everything. You know, you go to Freetown, you go to Monrovia, you go to Accra. You have to go to many places just to get the license. So what we can do, investors and startups, local startups like you, to change the local policies Than for people like you, will be easier, or that for Mary, or that for people that have seen a lot of challenges in Africa, but they cannot go further. Thank you.
Okay. Jessica?
Sure. Can I just make sure I got it right? So your question is, how can startups and investors work together to improve the policy environment for investors? Okay. Good question, if we had the answer to that. Everybody, West, East, so South Africa, everybody's working on this. And actually, from my side, I would actually turn the question around. Because from myself, I have a consultancy that works on creating exactly the kinds of public-private partnership structures to enable that kind of change at the policy level. So we work with companies and startups to help them grow and scale within their own business and into new markets. But we're also working with donors and policymakers to try to make exactly that change. And my question would be to turn it around to the startups with me on the panel and to investors like yourself. We need to know what you need. And people like me playing the middleman between the startup environment and the European and African capitals environment, working with policymakers, we need to distill a lot of inputs and then being able to put that within the context of the policy environment in that country. And I'll just give one example of a question where I actually wanted to ask you anyway, is to what extent would you as a business or an investor want a solution that kind of sidesteps local the current infrastructures and structures in which you work, and creates like somehow a fund or a mechanism for funneling investment faster to startups that is housed next to the existing structures versus being embedded in it? Because with dealing with local politics, it gets very messy. There's corruption, there's delays, and so there is an attractive idea to have a fund or a mechanism that is outside. But on the other hand, we don't want to undermine local governance and the evolution of the policy environment. So to what extent then is it better to actually tough it out and push a solution until it's working and inside existing local policy structures? This I would love to hear from you guys.
Well, if I try to answer to that, I think there's this saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, take everyone. If you want to build some sustainable business, you have to involve the stakeholders. So you don't really find a shortcut around the government or... so what does that mean for an everyday startup life? It just takes a lot of time. It requires a certain network of individuals. And yeah, that's probably it. How can you help?
So you're willing to wait?
Yeah, you're willing to, exactly. I mean, honestly, before I entered this African market 2.5-3 years ago, I was doing tech startup development, developing it, funding it here in Berlin. It's changed every 2 to 3 years, my working site, basically. I have no ambition that that's going to be the pace in Africa. I've prepared my personal surroundings and my family that this will take 10+ years. And I think, Tanzania just undergoes a really interesting situation with a new government for the last 2 years that has really ambitious long-term goals, which makes very difficult short-term situations for the economies that's now supposed to pay taxes and all of that. So it's hard to see the impact for the players. In order to survive in that and to have that team, what can investors and policymakers and consultants maybe do? Buying you time, I said that earlier, is probably the most important one. And detaching that buying of time from a certain agenda, like you have to spend X% of the funding in developers and blah, blah, blah. Because maybe what brings you forward is really just driving around town, sitting in traffic, meeting the right people to kind of solve a problem. And then accelerating this problem solving through trustworthy personal individuals in a network, I think that's something investors can cater to as well. We've learned that several times. We talk to someone, a potential investor, potential client, they're like, well, this is the challenge you're facing, let me make a phone call. And it's just because we didn't know the people. Right, so this is very cheap help, but you have to be a player on the ground, and you have to be connected. I think all of the ambitions of investors in terms of helping you with their great pool of mentors, helping you with the synergies of all the successes within their portfolio, just back off with that.
But isn't that maybe also a problem, you sort of Europeans trying to break into the African market? I mean, is that your experience where you would have been to school, university, and whatever, have a greater network? Do you face the same problems?
Yeah, of course. The challenge is always trying to maybe raise some capital, and it's very, very difficult. And I'm sure for the women, it's even going to be more difficult. But at the end of the day, for some of us, our companies, we decided to bootstrap a lot. We believe the change would come from us. So we found different ways around us that we could solve challenges and make profits of it, and use that to support the ideas and dreams we have. So, yeah.
Okay, I'm thinking we're going to run out of time. I'll take one more question because I've seen your hand go up a lot of times. So, yes, one question, but no statement, very brief and brief answer here.
Thanks a lot. I'm Kevin. I obviously don't really look very similar to many of the room. I come from Hong Kong. I work in the fintech consulting arm of one of the largest fintech companies in the world. I also run a family office. So my question, quite simple. For every one of the panelists, if I may, in the next 5 years, what do you guys see in the context particularly of Africa going out internationally, the key trend or theme that you guys are seeing, whether it be from startup or tech, so the key trend and the largest impediment that would be impeding that trend to happen? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. You sort of doing my last questions for me. That's perfect. So, you have 30 seconds each.
Could you just repeat the second question? I didn't fully get it.
What the biggest impediment would be in the next 5 years?
I think that the fintech is a good answer to that. And I think the mobile banking, that is banking in mobile or banks going mobile in Europe, will be the big thing. Because as you probably all know, the banks in Africa are there, but many things are going over your mobile phone. And this is linked to your mobile account. You don't need a bank account to do most of the transactions there. And I feel this is already going here. You see already fintech startups in Europe, and I think this will be an interesting sweet spot that things will be similar.
So your question was aiming at what it is that makes Africa go international. If Europe or other ecosystems provide well-working machines in terms of industries and corporates, I think Africa, what Africa can add to these huge calculators is the formula and the data you need to find that formula. Because I think entrepreneurial experiments and open-minded feasibility studies and just getting your hands dirty and trying things will generate the data and the experiences that companies, both already existing and being built around the world, will need to find the magic formula to find their centerpiece in the triangle and their entry into the market.
I think in the next 5 years, we'll see increased interest in African startups and the African tech ecosystem. When Moses and I first started organizing this conference last year, the very first one, we approached one hub and the guy said to us, "African startups? What are you talking about? I mean, why would I want to put my money there?" I think in the next 5 years, there will be proof of concept. there will be increased interest, not only from international players, but also from local players, which I think is very important. Impediments, I think, are sluggish government policies and laws. I don't think they will be able to keep up. It's moving very fast, and they're just not up to the task. Most of them, that is.
And corruption?
Sorry?
And corruption?
Part of the package.
Okay. We have it here in Germany too. Just ask us about the Berlin airport sometime. Yeah, a lot of what you guys said already, I agree, so I won't repeat. One add, we need this recognition of the opportunity and the potential in Africa to become mainstream. I mean, I think 20% of the faces in this room I've seen at all the other Africa conferences this past year. You know, we are not in the mainstream of the awareness in the tech sector and in the consumer sector. You know, when a German customer thinks it's normal to have a product in their phone or in their house that's made or designed in Africa, that's what we need. That's what's coming. But it's both something that's coming and currently an impediment that we don't have it yet.
Randolph, is Africa going to leapfrog over Europe in 10, 20 years in terms of technology?
You see, it's already happening.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So you find Andela providing software solutions for companies like Facebook in Silicon Valley. So for me, I think we don't have so many resources, right? Where internet is a challenge, we have unstable electricity and we're able to build software solutions. You know, the biggest challenges in the world are sometimes solved by small solutions. So I think the world is going to be looking up to Africa to for some of our solutions in 5 to 10 years to come. The challenges, I think, is definitely the policies. You know, we need more progressive leaders in Africa to understand how technology can transform our economies. Thank you.
Okay, I thank everyone for coming, and I'm very sorry that my South African part of my brain took over, and we're running on African time, so 5 minutes less for lunch. But maybe the next people will sort of catch up. Okay, thanks a lot.